like this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you?
Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. I want to first start out front and foremost. John McCain evidently has discontinued his treatment. According to the family, he has decided that's it. And look, he's already outlived the time that they've given him. And our thoughts go out to him and his family. Look, no matter what you think about his policies, no matter the voting record, he is a hero to this country and deserves our appreciation and our thoughts in this moment. Regardless of what of what Trump and all of the haters and all of them say, at the end of the day, he deserves our respect. So I just wanted to get that out right away because, there's so much anger and vitriol and, it's these moments that make you realize that, life is short and, we should be able to have conversations and come to some common ground instead of being as divided and polarized as we have become. It just is what it is. And I wanted to throw that out there, get it right out in front before we get into the other stuff. So there's that. Anyway, today, the big story, obviously, a couple of them. I mean, every day now it's getting, and get ready for this because it's going to get worse every day. There will be more fire hose. The fire hose is going to get turned up to like Mach 27. We are going to get blasted daily. So the two big stories that I saw today, obviously, were Trump canceled Pompeo going to North Korea after just a day of announcing that they were going. Evidently, they haven't made sufficient progress. Gee, who didn't see that coming? And the other one, and I don't even know how somebody has a name like Weaselberg, but evidently Alan Weaselberg, the CFO, the chief financial officer of the Trump organization, well, he was granted immunity in the prosecution of Michael in the Cohen probe. This huge, this enormous. This is one of those moments where you go, wow, Trump's day just got really, really bad. And this isn't Mueller. This is the state of New York. So, the Mueller probe, nobody's worrying about that. Impeachment, he's not worrying about that. He's not worried about any of that stuff. He's got to be worrying about all of the underlings. Kushner, Jr., the doofus kid that I can never remember his name, Ivanka, all of them will be wearing prison stripes or they'll be flipping on him. Now, I found it really very interesting that Spiro Agnews, I can't even say his name right, Spiro Agnew, his lawyer, Martin London. You may remember Spiro, if you're old enough, 1973, resigned as Nixon's vice president. Disgraced, resigned, out the door. His lawyer, it's probably a good time for Trump to resign before, everyone starts prosecuting the crime family. And he said, quote, "It only gets worse He said, we already have everybody. The rats are leaving the ship. And this is what I said yesterday. The rats are scurrying. What we're going to find out in the coming days, weeks, and not even months, in the coming days and weeks, is going to be mind-blowing. And all of the Fox News and all of the Dana Lushes and all of them not going to help. But Martin goes on to say the rats are leaving the ship. He's lost Gates, Papadopoulos, Cohen, Flynn, now Pecker. He's also probably going to lose from the Trump organization. So you're going to have Weaselberg, and then the rest of them are going to, nobody's taking the fall for this guy now. Not that everybody has moved in that direction. And, the one thing that I disagree with London, and there have been a couple of people who are saying, well, maybe he should resign now. Before all these prosecutions. He's not resigning. Let me be the first one to say he is not resigning. Not going to happen. The ego won't allow it to happen. The narcissism won't let it happen. He'll throw Barron under the bus before he resigns. He will burn everything down. He will scorch earth everything before he goes down. It's that simple. And look, you've Cohen, Weaselberg, and I said this the other day about Cohen, they know where the bodies are buried. They know all of the little this and that, and all of the shelf companies that were probably in those Panama Papers that we missed, and all the ones in the Caymans, and all the ones all around the world where they're stashing all kinds of illegal gotten gains. And you go, oh no, Rick, that can't. You wait. You wait and you see what comes out of this. And what I find interesting, I find it very, very interesting, because I'm hoping that we get the Pecker Papers. I'm hoping those come. I didn't just say that. But I'm hoping when we get what's in that safe at the National Enquirer, all of those stories, all of the compromat that the National Enquirer has been storing up and saving up. Think about it this way. A supermarket tabloid has information on this president. What do you think the Russians have? If a freaking supermarket tabloid that I used to, as a kid, read through and just laugh at, going, who could have possibly written this stuff? Who could read this? Because you're standing there at the checkout line. You need something to do. You need some entertainment. That's what that was for. Sadly, they could be the ones. The Fourth Estate, is already in the pocket. Could it really be that real, honest to goodness, fake news brings down this presidency? Is that possible? Now, look, I want to know what's in the Pecker Papers. I think those are really important, and I think Weaselberg will be there to confirm them. The walls are closing in. It's getting tighter and tighter, and it will be interesting to see how Trump, how he diminishes the Pecker Papers, how he goes after his longtime associates. You remember the other day he came out and said, well, if you want a lawyer, don't get Michael Cohen. The guy that he's been my personal lawyer for years. This is the guy who also said that we should make flipping illegal. Well, you know what? You're going to find out why he said that. Also, this week, Bloomberg News reported that during a lunch on Thursday, Trump reportedly told Attorney General Jeff Sessions that he believes that the dealers of fentanyl and the dealers of these opioids that are killing people, in fact, 72,000 last year, according to the CDC, died because of opioid overdose. He said that these people deserve the death penalty. And look, it isn't the first time he said it. He said it a bunch of times. But the last time I remember was back in March. Politico, I think, reported on it, that he was actually thinking about formally adopting that as the White House's policy to fighting the opioid crisis. We're just going to kill all of them. So we're going to kill the opioid addicts. Now, you remember Chris Collins, who's got himself in a bind now as well, was the first and the loudest cheerleader out there going, yeah, we want more death. He said, quote, I'm all in on the capital punishment side of those offenses that would warrant that. including drug cases. Yep, that was his answer. Now, how about congressmen who embezzle money or steal and cheat? What should we do with them? Just kind of throwing that out there. Now, for me, if you really truly believe in this, and I'm not a death penalty person, I never have been. I don't believe it is a deterrent. I think it's just about making us feel better. We want retribution. If you really, though, do believe that we should get rid of the drug dealers and that, death is the best way to do that, maybe we should start with the people, I don't know, in the corporate offices and boardrooms, or maybe even Rudy Giuliani. Because it's now being reported by Mother Jones that more than a decade ago, the company Purdue Pharma, who makes OxyContin, they evidently retained Rudy Giuliani to keep their CEOs out of prison and to put a fresh face on Oxy, and to use his star power coming out of being America's mayor to keep the regulators and the legislators off of the Oxy. This is going back to 2002. And you look at this and you go, these no good SOBs. If you're really gonna go down the let's execute them line of thought, let's start with Rudy. Let's start with Purdue Pharma. Let's start with these people who knowingly push this poison purely for profit. Let's start there. It's always interesting to me that the law and order crowd only wants to go after the people at the bottom, the powerless, the poor, the downtrodden, instead of the people who really cause the problems and really cause the commotion. And those would be the fat cats sitting in our corporate boardrooms. And what's frustrating to me is I look at somebody like Giuliani, who people put up on a pedestal. I never did. Was never a Giuliani fan, but people put this guy up on a pedestal like he can do no wrong. And now we're starting to find out. And look, when the floodgates open, you're going to see all kinds of horrible stuff that these people have done. All down the list. All of the Trump apologists, all of these Republican mouthpieces, all of the law and order types, all of the Christian evangelicals, all of these vermin and swine and charlatans and these rats. We're going to find out all of this stuff. As I understand, Wednesday, the Democrats sent a letter to the Department of Justice and the DEA asking for information about Giuliani partners. Evidently, they want to investigate what Rudy did, when he did it, how he did it, and who he did it for, and how that has helped to contribute to this crisis. And I got to wonder, if it's found out that he's the one who made the road easier to push this poison, I wonder if Donnie Boy would say, let's execute him first. Very bizarre times we live in, folks. But at the end of it, the floodgates will open. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you know. I got to take a quick break. When we come back, Brett Pransky's going to be here. He's running for State House out in Ohio's 77th District. Trump is in Ohio today. Going to get some of his thoughts as we talk. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
90% of the wealth, 10% of the people. 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people. 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith. and this is Labor History in 2. The year was 1877. That summer, during what came to be known as the Great Upheaval, police, the U.S. Army, and the National Guard brutally crushed a national railroad strike. The simmering anger of working people had many elected officials and industrialists on edge. One man saw the labor unrest as a business opportunity, and on this day in labor history, the treasurer of the Gatlin Gun Company wrote a letter to the president of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad with a proposal. He wrote, "We have the honor to suggest that you strengthen yourself now against such emergencies in the future by providing yourselves with Gatlin guns. 4 or 5 men only are required to operate it, and one Gatling with a full supply of ammunition can clear a street or track and keep it clear." The 6-barrel hand-cranked weapon could fire 200 bullets a minute. Upgrades to the gun soon had it cranking out an astonishing 600 bullets a minute. This ferocious new weapon set its sights on the cause of labor. In 1878, in Cleveland, Ohio, 25 prominent citizens formed the Cleveland Gatlin Gun Battery to deal with labor uprisings. Armed with 2 of the new guns, the militia drilled and held social events, but never fired the gun against workers. Militias from San Francisco to Connecticut, from Kansas to Pennsylvania, likewise armed themselves. Perhaps the place where the gun became most infamously used against labor was in the Colorado mining wars. In 1914, a Gatlin-type gun mounted on an armored car was used to shoot up a workers' tent city in Ludlow.
Pavlichenko, well known to fame, Russia's your country, fighting.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith
For
Show.
all time to come, 300 Nazis fell by your gun. Fell by.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
He's going the distance. He's going for speed. She's all alone in a car.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. So, Donald Trump is in Ohio today. Evidently gave a big sloppy wet kiss to Jim Jordan. He said, you know, people don't know this about Jim, but he was one of the best wrestlers ever in college wrestling. And when you see the way he fights, every time he fights, I say to my wife, look at that guy. That's a tough. He lost 1 match in 3 years of college, evidently, according to Trump. And he went on a whole big sloppy wet. Ohio's gonna, gonna go down the tubes if Richard Cordray wins because, hey, Pocahontas trained him. What a disaster. What an absolute disaster. Anyway, here to talk about what's going on in Ohio, his campaign in the 77th House race. And look, we got to take back every state house across this country and flip a bunch of them in our direction. That's why I've asked Brett Pransky to come talk with us. He's running in Ohio's 77th district. Brett, thanks for taking time for us.
Hi, Rick. Nice to be here.
So you got the Donald in your backyard.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. He does bring quite the circus, doesn't he?
Better you than me. But, you know, here's the thing. At this moment, is he going to help or hurt given this onslaught of everything that we're now seeing? Now we're seeing all these people coming forward. Is this going to help candidates or hurt them, do you think?
You know, I think the jury's kind of still out on that one. I mean, we just had the special election in the Ohio 12th, which actually just certified today. So the Republican did end up squeaking that out by the thinnest of margins, even though that district has been gerrymandered Republican in a pretty dramatic way. But Trump came here for that, too. And, you know, there were mixed emotions, mixed feelings on it. In fact, even the candidate himself, you know, I believe he said out loud that he didn't actually ask Trump to come. So I think even folks on the right, even, you know, folks in deep red America are really torn about whether or not they want him in town.
Yeah. So now how is this going to, this victory by Balderson, hopefully only till November, because there will be a round 2 in November, which not all the resources are going to be going there, and hopefully they send him packing home. But how's it going to affect you?
Well, it actually is going to affect my race in a pretty interesting way. I mean, for example, Troy Balderson has now been declared the winner, which means the first thing he has to do is he has to vacate the seat he's currently sitting in.
Right.
So he's an Ohio State senator now. Now, the state senator that was in that seat before him is my opponent in a House race. So, and he got the question the other day whether or not he's going to jump out of the House into the Senate and take his old seat back, and he punted on the question. He basically didn't commit to serve if he was elected. So there's a pretty good chance that I'm, kind of running against a question mark. They don't really know. My opponent really hasn't committed to serve, and so and if he can't do that, we kind of have to assume that he's not going to, which is kind of how I'm taking it. If he can't say out loud, if I'm elected, I will serve. Which, by the way, if I'm elected, I will serve. Then we kind of have to assume that he's not going to, because he was so kind of standoffish. I think the closest he came to a commitment was saying that he had a responsibility to win in November. All right, but he didn't extend anything past that date. So I mean, it seemed a little odd. It seemed an odd way to commit, to a House seat. So I think it's pretty certain that he's going to take his old Senate seat back. And I'm running against, I guess, to use a baseball metaphor, a player to be named later. Okay,
well, let's hope no matter who it is, you send them packing into the unemployment line in November, because we need good, decent, honest people. And look, Ohio has had so many problems with corruption and all of this stuff. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but there needs to be a big broom, and a bunch of people need to be swept to the curb.
Yeah, we need wholesale changes here in Ohio, and a lot of it. And again, we keep going back to gerrymandering, and it's because that is really the problem. What we have here in Ohio, and I'm going to quote a couple stats for you here. I believe it was either 2012 or 2014 in Ohio, we got something like 52 or 53% of the votes in the state. Democrats did, right? And we got 33% of the House seats, or at least the state House seats, 25% of the congressional seats, after winning over 50% of the vote. That's what gerrymandering does. So you have to win by 10 or win by 12 to get an even split.
Yep.
So it's really becoming difficult. The only problem is with that whole strategy now is we might actually win by 10 or win by 12 across the board in November, and then that'll upset the whole apple cart. We'll be able to come in and and put things right again.
Well, that is the hope. I mean, the same thing where I'm at in Pennsylvania. You've got I think in the last congressional election, you had Democrats getting like 500,000 more votes, and ending up with 5 of 18 seats.
Right, and here in Ohio, we're kind of a snapshot of the nation. Right, we're pretty much a 50-50 state, or as close to it as you can possibly get anywhere in America, and yet we still have this kind of Republican dominance in every house, from the congressional races to the state house races to state Senate races, and then all through the statewide races. They're all Republicans, pretty much across the board. And that's just not representative of the people. If half the people, want different representation, then they should get it, and it should be, we're not asking for, I don't think every seat should turn blue, although that would be kind of nice. Just getting a fair representation for the people would be a good step in the right direction. And the fact that we have, kind of fixed the system so that can't happen is really unfortunate. And I think the voters are pretty tired of it.
And hopefully they come out this November and vote, and not just your regular voters, but everybody. And this is every election I say this, and every election we talk about the fact that only half of the people bother to register and show up to vote. It's yet everybody likes to complain. I said, if you don't vote, you can't complain. Can we pass a law saying that if you don't vote, you can't complain?
I don't know how you'd enforce it, but it's not the worst idea in the world.
But I look at, you've got Trump in your backyard, and I don't think I was expecting something about John McCain, some bit of humility. I don't think I saw it.
No, in fact, I was just kind of hoping that while he was in town, or just at all today, that he would just keep John McCain's name out of his mouth. Because keep in mind, this is someone who I oppose, and I opposed vigorously when he ran for president. I do not agree with his politics, and I never have. But questioning the man's integrity, the man's patriotism, the man's heroism, which is what Trump has been doing and has done several times over. These things are just flat out wrong.
Right.
I mean, John McCain is an opponent of people who think like me, but he's a patriotic opponent. And, somewhere along the line, we've lost that. We need to get it back.
No, I mean, I go back to the moment where, and I'm sure you've seen this a bunch of times as well, where the woman stood up and was talking about Barack Obama being a Muslim and not from this country, and McCain, shut her down, said, no, that's not right. I disagree with him on policy, But he's a good family man, and that's exactly how I see McCain. I may disagree with him on most of his policy choices and on his ideology, but as a human being and as a patriot to this country, that's unquestionable.
Yeah, I mean, his loss will be a loss for all Americans across the board, regardless of what you think, regardless of what you believe. A world without John McCain in it is a lesser world, and I think we can all agree on that. At least we should be able to agree on that. And I just hope that that the family finds some comfort in the fact that even the people who opposed him as vigorously as I did have a tremendous amount of respect for him and always will.
Yeah. Let's talk about the economy a little bit. I saw this clip of Donald Trump saying how wonderful the economy is, how he has built this incredible economy. Forget all the Obama years and all of the steady growth and never mind the massive stimulus that they've thrown out. He's claiming that he's built this most profitable economy, the best economy ever, yet the numbers that I've seen recently show that wages for workers are actually going down. To me, that's not an economy that works for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, I guess you could call it hitting the bullseye on the wrong target, to kind of use an old cliche. When you think about an economy, you have to ask yourself, what is an economy? What is an economy for? All right, because that's a central question. And if an economy exists to maximize profit at the top end and to create the highest stock price you possibly can, well then yeah, we're doing okay. But that doesn't buy my neighbor a new bass boat. If wages are flat, or actually compared against inflation, they're declining, well then you have an economy that's booming for a very small number of people, but for regular America, it's not really doing anything at all, or it's actually hurting many of us. And again, we get back to that question. What is an economy for? And if it's not for my friends and neighbors, then I'm not interested in your talk about it.
But you've got this view that the Dow, that's what we got to watch out. Wall Street, we got to make sure stocks are climbing, and the Dow's up, and we've been trained like Pavlovian dogs to follow the stock market. And I remember watching it happen back in the early 90s. As companies started really hammering on that, our value is this stock price. And every day I remember going to work and, having the foreman do the pre-shift meeting and say, hey, our stock price did this. And I remember sitting there going, why do I care? Why does this matter today? How is it that any of us are going to change that number? It's not possible, but it got us thinking in those terms, and not just on the job, but societally.
Yeah, I mean, when the Dow is kind of an interesting way to look at the economy, because when you look at what it is, about half of Americans have some sort of money in the market. About half of us. Most of us have it in like a 401k or some kind of retirement plan, and for most of it, it's a relatively small amount of money. The market is controlled by the very rich, at least largely so. But look how they've set it up. Look what we just did. We just basically injected $1.5 trillion into the market directly. Where do we get that money? From taxpayers. From people like you and me and regular folks. We put in order to pump up that market that benefits less than half of us.
Right, and we borrowed it from our children.
Yeah, and on top of that, if the market tanks, if the rich folks out there make stupid decisions, take stupid risks, they're going to come back to us, the taxpayer, again, just like they did the last time, and we're going to have to bail them out. So look what they've done. They've managed to privatize the profit and socialize the risk.
Yep. And I love your optimism, though, Brett. You said if they crash the economy. I'm more of the mindset of when they do it again, because they've learned. This is learned behavior. Build up, create crisis, bang, crisis, and then hey, tighten the belt. That's what we've learned.
It's a consequence-free environment for the rich. You know what I mean? Somebody else is going to come along and bail them out if they make dumb mistakes. So if there are no consequences, if nobody actually gets thrown out on the street, at least except for people in my neighborhood, then this is just going to keep happening. And the people who pull the strings and control this market are going to keep taking stupid risks, keep valuing the short term over the long term, which is exactly what the last tax cut was. And people are going to get hurt. I mean, it's not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. It will happen. And when that happens, it's going to happen to people in neighborhoods like mine.
Yeah, so
I lived in one of those neighborhoods where 1 in 10 households was being foreclosed upon during the crisis. And I'm pretty sure that the folks who caused that problem weren't living in those neighborhoods. So again, they can play with the market as much as they want. They can take big risks. They can gamble because it's somebody else's money.
Yeah, it reminds me of that movie with Danny DeVito, Other People's Money, and how they just just rob, steal, pillage, all of that. I wanted to ask you about the opioid crisis. We saw the CDC came out, said 72,000 people died last year due to opioid addiction. You got the president who evidently on Thursday said he wants to look at perhaps executing opioid dealers. In there somewhere is some bit of reality and hope. Any thoughts?
Well, I mean, I'm in Ohio, and which means that we are the epicenter of the opioid crisis. We're losing 14 people a day, and it's a staggering problem. But it's much bigger than just that body count and the losses that come along with it. It's the residual effects. Now, this crisis is over 20 years old. We're in our second generation of addicts. Sons and daughters of addicts being raised by their grandparents. I met a couple just last week at a benefit concert. I was on stage talking to some folks, invited people to come talk to me afterwards, and they came to me with this story about how they were raising their 3 granddaughters. And they had written their daughter off because she was a lost cause to them. Imagine that. The situation where you write off your own kid. What level of tragedy do you have to experience before you can find a way to do that?
Yeah.
So they're raising these 3 daughters, all of them born addicted, all of them born with severe special needs. They're trying to work and live their lives and also raise these kids and be compassionate and so on. Every time they go to the system for help, they don't get that help because they're stable, because they're good people. There's so many more kids out there in greater state of crisis that because these kids are cared for, the system doesn't want to do anything for them because they're currently at this moment safe. That's how stressed the system is. We can't take it anymore. And it's just, and on top of all of this, again, we talked earlier about socializing the risk. Who are they coming to solve the problem? The taxpayer. You talked about Purdue Pharmaceuticals earlier. Why isn't there a Purdue wing on every rehab center in the country? Why haven't they had to, inject billions of dollars into solving the problem that they caused? Why aren't we doing them the same way we did big tobacco for perpetrating a fraud against the citizens of the United States? I don't know why these actions aren't taking place, but they're not. Here we are 20 years deep into this problem.
Well, because they've bought off the right people. And I mean, Rudy Giuliani, who now the Senate Democrats want information on, we now find out he was part of this. And we're going to find out eventually how many of these big power players were involved in creating this crisis that's going to harm people at the bottom, that the poor and the working class of this country are going to have to clean up the mess over.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's kind of what I'm seeing on the ground. And one thing I'd like to express about this issue is it doesn't matter who I'm speaking to. I've spoken to addicts. I've spoken to my students who talk to me about their addictions, about their parents' addictions. I talk about the couple that I met last weekend at the benefit concert, and they all say the same thing. It sounds just like this. I don't know what to do.
And there's a lot of that, Brett. I mean, there's a lot of despair. There's a lot of hopelessness. And I keep trying to tell people, November is when we can begin to turn this around. I have to remain optimistic. I have to remain believing that we can change things and that, when we roll up our sleeves and get our hands dirty, that we move this country in the right direction. Or maybe, or maybe I'd be one of those people.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, we have to answer that question for the people. When they say, I don't know what to do, tell me what to do, we have to have an answer. Some kind of answer. Right now, we have nothing. We have no serious response of any kind. We've made a few steps towards cutting off the supply and things like that. And I'm not saying these are bad things to do. These are good things to do. But it doesn't help the people in the situation on the ground. And we really need to find a way to do that.
I mean, but the powerful right now seem to have us by the short hairs, Brett. I mean, the people in power right now, they're in power.
No, that's exactly right. And when you think about power, think about money, because that's essentially what happens. We've talked about money and how they buy seats, especially in races like mine and so on. Well, they use those seats. They use those seats to pass certain laws to make sure that certain things are looked into and certain things are not. And it's just not the way the system is supposed to work. We're supposed to represent the people. That's it. That's all. End of story.
Yeah, as I've always said that, they have all the money, but we've outprocreated them. And for now, while we still can vote, we have the ability to change things, and their money doesn't mean anything if we organize, if we stand together, if we fight, and if we demand change. Their money, and if we don't allow them to divide us, their money doesn't mean anything.
That's exactly right. Because there's really one important thing. This is really what I've learned since I got into the mix and started running in a race. It's very simple. All right, they're not the majority. They're not. They're just in power. And there's a difference there, right? They're not the majority. We're the majority. They're in power, but we're the majority. And as soon as we start acting like it, things will change. Everybody gets out, everybody votes, everybody knocks doors, everybody gets involved, everybody does everything they can between now and November to make change, and change will come. And if we don't do that, then nothing will happen.
So how do we get you into office? I hope people will visit your website, brettpransky.com. We'll get that out to make sure people see it. But how can folks help?
Well, there's any number of ways people can help. Again, if you go to the website, you'll find a number of ways to volunteer, to help out. You can donate to the campaign, which is always a big help. Again, I'm up against a guy with pretty much a bottomless war chest, so every dollar helps. But we're running a smart campaign. We're running a very smart, very clever campaign. It's getting a lot of good work done. But really, more than anything else, I need people. I need people. I need bodies. I need shoes on the pavement, talking to voters. And we're doing great with that, but we can always have more.
And again, the website, brettpransky.com. We'll make sure we get links out so folks can get involved. We're ticking down to November. It may seem down the road, but it will be here before you know it. And the work we do today will change this country for tomorrow. Brett, I appreciate the time, the work. Best on you, and I can't wait to have you come back again real soon.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Brett. Again, brettpransky.com is the website. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
But I don't really know. I can't remember caring for an hour.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1970. That was the day that the United Farm Workers went out on strike against California lettuce growers. The United Farm Workers had led a successful boycott against grape growers that had drawn national attention to the harsh working conditions and low pay of those who harvested our nation's food. In an effort to keep the United Farm Workers from organizing lettuce workers, some of the growers had signed contracts with the Teamsters Union. The United Farm Workers argued that these contracts did not represent the workers' best interests. As thousands of workers went on strike, Cesar Chavez called for a national boycott of all non-union lettuce. In the lead-up to the strike, an estimated 4,000 workers attended a meeting in Salinas, California. One worker, Antonio Segredo, explained the importance of the action. Rael Macaredo, voice of the Farm Worker newsletter, reported his words, quote, "Let the people and the government of the United States know that we are ready to work, but that we must have what we ask. It isn't very much. We don't ask the impossible, only that they look upon us as human beings. We have the same ambitions that they do. We have families. We have rights. Why must they continue to treat us like beasts of burden and look for 1,000 ways to bring us down?" That December, Cesar Chavez was jailed for leading the boycott. Putting pressure on the growers through encouraging the public to boycott non-union harvested food was a key tactic for the farm workers movement. It impacted the bottom line of the growers and moved them to sit down at the bargaining table. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
The animals, trap, 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 till the cages fall. The cages fall, stay away in the dark, count mistakes. The light is off.
Sanity for a change. The Rick Smith Show.
Day is new, and everyone is waiting on you. And you got
gotta love the fact that Duncan Hunter, who evidently pled not guilty yesterday, out on $15,000 bond, went on Fox News and threw the wife under the bus. And you knew that was coming, right? You knew he was going to throw the wife under the bus. He says, quote, "I gave the wife power of attorney. She handled my finances throughout my entire military career, and that continued when I got into Congress. She was also the campaign manager, so whatever she did, that'll be looked into, I'm sure. But I didn't do it." Yeah. Anybody buying it? Anybody buying throwing the wife under the bus? And when they're found guilty, I think the proper punishment is they should have to share a cell together. Just kind of throwing that out. And this clip of him throwing her under the bus should be played on the speaker 16 hours a day. Just kind of throwing that out there. Another funny little TV moment. Dana Lash, the NRA spokesperson, she claims that the left, the liberals, that the FBI, that all of those people who are against Trump, that they're trying to Al Capone the president. This is the second Al Capone reference in only a couple of weeks. Once, you had Trump doing the Alphonse Capone thing, which I think everyone, including me, thought was some kind of a code. And now she's throwing it out. She points out that Capone didn't go down for murder, and that is true. She said Elliot Ness didn't put him in for murder. He went in for tax fraud. Prosecutors didn't care how he went down, as long as he went down. She says the moral argument over the president's infidelities would never result in legal trouble, so they believe they have to take a lesson from the Clinton years and find a way to make a legal problem. And that's exactly what they're doing, using campaign finance for an already unconstitutional set of laws to pull it off. Because look, they don't believe in taxes, so they believe the whole tax system is unconstitutional, and they believe campaign finance laws are unconstitutional. So any of this stuff to them is unconstitutional. So that's going to be the crazy justification. He can do whatever he wants. He can lie, cheat, steal, and they will find a justification for it. And this is where I think ultra conservatives and the rest of society differ. This is that kind of thing where you make justifications for your guy. I always said that Clinton was wrong for what he did. But I also said he should have never been asked the question. I think people's sex lives should be just never mind. Stop it. We got other things to worry about. But that he shouldn't have lied. And getting into the whole, is and that, most people were lost on that. But you now have a president who we've known for a long time has been doing some pretty shady stuff. Has some pretty shady contacts, has some pretty shady relationships. And we're going to find out all of them. With Alan Weaselberg coming forward and getting an immunity, somebody's going to give him a shovel, and he's going to go digging up all the bodies. And maybe even some actual bodies along the way. So the question, that Nixonian question of, is our president a crook? We're going to find out. So this Lesh thing, this is a major distraction. This is another one of those things to give the minions something to go to the lunchroom and go, see, Trump, this is a setup, Al Capone, and not even understanding what the hell they're talking about. Or these QAnon idiots. And I know most of us are fortunate not to have any idea who these people are. They're folks who believe that, I almost hate to have to know this, but they seem to believe that Trump and the military are about to take down a major global pedophile ring. That there's this shadow war going on, and that there's the Illuminati is trying to take down all that's good and decent, and that that there are clues all over the internet for it's like Pokemon Go for crazy people. That's kind of what it is. It's like Pokemon Go for the mentally challenged on the far right. The conspiracy theory nuts now have a new fun game. And look, and if you want to go with that, go ahead. You can use that because that's what this is. This is basically Pokemon Go for the challenged. And this is where the scary part is, because I've been saying for a while that eventually Trump will embrace them because they already believe he has. Someone had sent me a statement, saying that they're already talking in code, like someone had written TikTok on some message that one of the QAnoners had found, and then on Easter, for the Easter egg roll, Trump said tippy top shape, and that was code. Everyone knew that was code, and they were in on it, and the rest of us who don't know, we were left behind. And I always love that. I always love that secret society stuff. But the sad part about it is evidently one of the top QAnon people, this guy Lionel LeBron, evidently was in the White House just yesterday, got a special White House tour, and took photos with Trump. And you go, how is it that a conspiracy kook like this gets a special tour in the White House and photos with Trump? It kind of makes you go, what exactly is going on? Just how down the conspiracy rabbit hole is Trump going? How far down does he have to reach for new supporters? How low is he going to go? Because the headline was, a new low. And I'm going, well, I'm sure there are going to be a lot of new lows. So I love the fact that, that they didn't say this is the lowest. No, just a new low, because we're going to get much lower. But the question is, how much lower before Republicans? And again, it's going to be just like during the Nixon years. It's going to be Republicans who eventually have to throw him under the bus. Because guess what? Let me let you in a little secret, GOP. He's throwing you under the bus big time. He will scorch all of your earth. And the hope is, when he does, that the knuckle draggers and the mouth breathers and the people who send me messages telling me that they don't care what he does, he's still right and I agree with everything he does, maybe they wake up. But more importantly, maybe they don't, and we just leave them behind. I had someone tell me today, when are you libtards going to learn? We don't care what he does. And he goes on this whole thing, this whole rant. And I'm going, well, the message wasn't for you. You're already irrelevant in my view. You're a 5. We don't bother with 5s. Let the 5s go. Work on people that we can move forward with. And maybe there's going to be a segment we're going to have to maybe give them Utah. Maybe we can have a fund to take all the 5s and put them in Utah. Just kind of a thought. I'd love to hear yours. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. Kavanaugh, Brett Kavanaugh, Supreme Court. When we come back, another reason why we must resist in a huge way, because they're already setting up for when Kavanaugh's on the court. Quick break, right back.
When the kids are united, they can never be defined as yesterday. There's a brand new show today.
Uncovering the con in conservatism. Rick Smith.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 Minutes. This broadcast is on holiday until September 10th, but instead of airing repeats, we've asked some go-to foreign policy experts what they'll be paying attention to in the weeks to come. Jeff Ramsey is the Assistant Director for Venezuela at the Washington Office on Latin America, and he's been watching embattled President Nicolas Maduro's rollout of a new currency.
Maduro recently announced new economic measures that would replace the old Bolivar currency with a new version of the Bolivar called the sovereign Bolivar, and he has pegged that new currency to the petro, the cryptocurrency.
You heard that right. Unable to obtain foreign financing to service its debt, Venezuela earlier this year created a digital cryptocurrency pegged to the price of a barrel of Venezuelan oil. Ramsey says Maduro's decision to peg the value of Venezuela's new hard currency on as unproven a financial asset as a cryptocurrency speaks to the economic desperation in Venezuela.
The major problem is that if you're trying to reverse hyperinflation, you need to scrap an old currency that's viewed as worthless, which they're trying to do, but the new currency needs to be seen as credible. Frankly, I just don't think that the government is accomplishing that. We also don't think the government's going to stop printing money to meet its financing needs. And ultimately, there's no plan to stimulate investment or get buy-in from the private sector. I think we can safely say that Venezuela's economic woes are not turning around.
Lacking a stable currency, Venezuelans are increasingly relying on digital microtransactions, small person-to-person e-payments, but that's not feasible for everyone.
For the poorest Venezuelans that don't have access to bank accounts or online transfers, that are still reliant on hard cash, they're increasingly unable to run sort of everyday small businesses or economic activity. They're relying more on things like bartering.
Luke Vargas, the United Nations.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. So a group of 16 states, they urged the U.S. Supreme Court on August 23rd to rule that companies can fire workers based on their sexual orientation and gender identity without violating workplace discrimination laws, as reported today by AMU. This, again, we know all these are coming. This is setting up what we know is a right-wing wet dream. We're going to go back and we're going to undo all of the progress for the LGBTQ community. They're pushing back on the use of Title VII civil right of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. By saying that, well, when they talked about sex, it was only a biological thing, and this is all because evidently a funeral home had fired this woman who transitioned from a man to a woman, and she had informed this funeral home that that's what they were doing, and they fired her. And the EEOC, the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission, sued and won, and and it was almost decided, it was almost settled. And now you're going to see this kind of litigation happen, along with a whole bunch of other things. I mean, this is just one slice of what we see coming. But look how quickly it's already begun. He's not even confirmed yet, and they're teeing up the next case to undo, 50 years of progress. And it isn't just going to be on gay rights. It's just not going to be. It's going to be on every bit of progress of the 20th century. And I'm not being hyperbolic. There is nothing that the conservative ideology likes about the New Deal era. They have been fighting against it from the beginning. The difference was that we, the people, wanted it. We, the people, want safe workplaces, and I argue still do. We want decent wage jobs, and I would argue we still do. We want to make sure that all kids get education. We want to make sure that everyone has equal access under the law. That's not necessarily going to be the future. You're going to see more cases going the side of big corporations. You're going to see more cases going against consumers and workers and women and just all down the list. And this is one of those moments where you sit back and you ask the question, how bad does it have to get before people spring to action. You know, I had a conversation yesterday with a guest off air about Roe versus Wade being, you know, that it's her issue. You know, it's the central issue to all women, because what you're doing is you're taking their ability to have say over their body away. And as a white man, one, I never think I should have any say in that whatsoever, because it's not my body. But two, I want to be helpful. And I don't want my daughters to have to endure the kind of stuff that my mother told me happened to her friends when it was illegal. Now I've had people say, you know, it'll be okay though. It'll be okay when Roe's overturned, and it will be. Trust me, it's going to happen. If Kavanaugh is seated on the Supreme Court, it is going to happen. Then it reverts back to the states, and that goes back to the, you know, my conservative friend who, you know, after the election and Trump was elected, he said it's going to be interesting to watch liberals become states' rights people, and this is where he's right. This is one of those issues that reverts back to the states, and there are going to be crazy red states, and it is going to rip us apart even further. And the question becomes, you know, what do we have to do now to stop this? And, you know, as my guest said yesterday, you should be calling, and we say this all the time, call your senators, call your congressmen, write letters to the editors, do that kind of stuff. Get out and vote, talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, all of that stuff. And, you know, as I've talked to people over the years about that, you know, it seems like hopelessness and despair, that they never get the feedback or they never feel that it matters. It does. So when I saw this, and it was one of these things that, you know, someone sent me, and oh, wow, look at this. It got me thinking that they're already teeing up the set of cases that are going to be taking down what's left of a progressive generation. What's left of creating that future for all. And things aren't perfect right now, but I say we're going to be going backwards very quickly. The Norman Rockwell era of the 50s, and, you know, we're going to be heading back to that kind of repressive era. And it scares me, because the ideologues, they're still going to get whatever they want. It's the rest of us who are going to fight and struggle, and the turmoil that's coming ahead. And that's the troubling part in this for me. Is that, you know, you had all that turmoil of the 60s and the 70s, early 70s, and you had, you know, people in the streets, you know, beating each other. I fear that comes back. And it's this kind of a divisive court that's going to lead us there. This idea that, and it's really just mind-blowing to me, this idea that we're going to allow people to be fired because of what they do in the confines of their four walls. And I remember a couple years ago, I interviewed a guy who was the first person ever fired for being gay. And he said, look, you know, my evaluations were perfect. You know, I came to work, I made, you know, the company lots of money, but once they found out, didn't matter. None of the evaluations mattered. None of the money didn't matter. Nothing mattered. They sent him to the curb. And he had no recourse whatsoever outside of filing for unemployment. Is that the kind of at-will world that we want? Because look, it's not going to just end there. It's like any kind of hate or discrimination. It only grows larger and larger. And it only gets worse. And while they claim now that there are some protections under the law, every person should be protected under the law. Every person should have the right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Every person, regardless of your religion, your race, your orientation, your political views, everybody should be protected under this Constitution. Because isn't that what it's all about, really? I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
Monopolies are not merely un-American, they're virulently anti-American, suppressing our fundamental values of fairness and opportunity for all. So, our people have instinctively rebelled at monopoly avarice. The Boston Tea Party, the populist movement, union action, trustbusters, muckrakers, the New Deal, and on and on. Yet, in just the last couple of decades, corporate elites and their public officials have enshrined monopoly power as a legitimate form of business in our land, aggressively protected by lawmakers, regulators, and judges. For example, after our grassroots economy was crushed in 2007 by the greed of too-big-to-fail Wall Street banksters, officials bailed out the villainous banks at taxpayer expense and deliberately made them bigger, more powerful, and more dangerous than ever. Today, just 5 banks control nearly half of all assets in the U.S. financial system. You'd think such a massive power grab by bank monopolists would produce an equally massive 24/7 barrage of coverage by the nation's media outlets, which purport to be the defenders of democracy. But while an occasional story pops out about monopoly abuse, there's no comprehensive coverage to rally a public rebellion against what's become the United States of monopoly rule. Why? Look at who owns America's mass media. 3 decades ago, 50 large media conglomerates controlled 90% of the media. This year, after a frenzy of mergers among those giants, just 5 mega media monopolists will control 90% of what we see, hear, and read. It's not in their interest to inform the public about the threat that monopolies pose to our democracy, so they don't. This is Jim Hightower saying, as the great journalist A.J. Liebling warned nearly 40 years ago, freedom of the press is guaranteed only to those who own one. To help battle the monopolists, go to Center for Media and Democracy at prwatch.org/CMD.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
The world keeps telling me to get a grip or I won't last. Gotta break away from solitude and let go of my past. I've never found it easy to change my stubborn ways or to gain perspective, throw away those soulless days. We have struggled, we have prayed, we're still searching for something more. We have struggled, we still pray, we're looking for the chance to be free.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So the other day, I asked the question, which is worse? Is it worse that you have a neo-Nazi white supremacist or a white evangelical Christian supremacist? Which is worse? And I got lots of responses, most along the lines of, they're one and the same, cut from the same cloth. Both are bad. Got lots of those. And, while my mindset was looking at it from, Trump, who I do believe is a neo-Nazi sympathizer, and Mike Pence, remember, Trump with the good people on both sides there in Charlottesville, and Mike Pence, who I believe is a theocratic, evangelical Christian supremacist. I got much more than I originally asked for. And a listener suggested I have a conversation with my next guest, who has written extensively on white supremacy and race relations in America. He is the co-founder of Scale Up Partners, LLC, which is a network of experts in economic inclusion and competitiveness strategies, frameworks, and policies. They help individuals, organizations, and institutions contribute to building a 21st century inclusive society that empowers all Americans toward equitable shared prosperity. Mike Green, thanks for taking time for me.
Well, I appreciate you taking me on your show.
So which is worse? Which is worse, a crazy right-wing Nazi white supremacist or a Christian evangelical supremacist?
Depends on the outcome. At the end of the day, we all want what's best for our children and our families.
Right.
Is that right?
Correct.
In the United States, we have to start with understanding the history. And I'm going to use some shorthand here. I'm going to say white people, but I mean in general, but I don't mean every single solitary white person. So in general, white people do not know their own history of oppressing others. And that's because, by design, history has been written by the victors. And so without having knowledge of what white people have done to oppress others, we live in what most people would call a white privilege society. And the privilege is that white people can live in relative comfort and ignorance of what's happening outside of that comfortable bubble that is oppressing others and causing suffering of others. So that privilege allows them to live their entire lives without having much knowledge of the others living outside of that bubble and suffering. Now, the reason why that's ironic is because when you started this nation in 1776, it was started on the premise of what to do with black people. That was the question. Slave or slave-free. And so white people had to choose. Now, it was white people versus white people when they fought against England. And so when they formed the sovereign United States of America, they had to decide this question by themselves. What are we going to do with black people? Now, they were divided. By the time you get to the Civil War, they're still divided. After the Civil War in 1868, the same question was approached. What to do with these newly freed black slaves? So now we're still dealing with the same question, what to do with black people? And keep in mind, these are white Christian evangelicals asking themselves this question, what to do with black people? You would think that that's already been answered by Jesus. But it was still a question here in the United States.
Right. So to answer the question, what do you do, or is it not anything that you can do?
Well, here's the opportunity. You had 4 million refugees. These are refugees, destitute. They own nothing. They've been oppressed, and they're coming out of slavery. And so the battleground between white males was that we can make them citizens or not. And so that battle was fought over a bill called the Civil Rights Bill of 1866, first civil rights bill we had in this country. And they were asking themselves, what are we going to do with black people? They fought over that for 2 years. And in 1868, they finally came to a decision. And the way they came to a decision was that the North, and these were led by the radical Republicans in Congress then, no relation to the Republicans we have today.
Right.
They were radical. They coerced, they threatened the 37 states and said, if you do not pass this bill, and they needed a 2/3 majority, then you would remain under martial law. And most of the southern states were under martial law. So the southern states acquiesced. And that's how we got the 14th Amendment, which, by the way, is still the most cited constitutional law we have in court cases to this very day. It was the one that decided the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education, and it continues to be the ground framework upon which we argue over immigration today. The 14th Amendment is fundamental to the question of what are we going to do with black and brown folks, because this was a white citizen-only country, and that's when you hear that idea of let's take our country back. That's what they're going back to. This country was founded for and by white people on the backs of black and brown people, and they were able to segregate the natives because the natives had land and that they put them off on, and so they used that same system of segregation for black folks after 1868 when they passed the 14th Amendment that made us citizens. But we didn't have any land. We didn't have any place you could put us. We weren't out of sight and out of mind. We were right there. And so they waged a war against black folks, and that war lasted for 100 years. Now, keep in mind that we were told explicitly by someone whose name is ubiquitous, Dr. Martin Luther King, about this war in one of his most iconic speeches, and yet we did not hear it as a nation. And if you permit me 30 seconds, I want to undergird this conversation with the words of King, because from the death of King to now is 50 years, and that's everything we're going to be talking about from this point forward. So we need to have these words that we haven't heard in a long time inserted into this conversation as a foundation.
By all means, go.
Okay. So he started with talking about the Emancipation Proclamation that Lincoln made in 1863. And then he said this is his first refrain. He said, 100 years later, the Negro is still not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. And so we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. That shameful condition is segregation. And that shameful condition can be measured. So we're not just talking about racism and people's attitudes toward one another and how they treat it. No, we're talking about systemic policies and practices that actually oppress people and continue to, by generation, oppress their descendants, while at the same time providing benefits and bias toward whites. That system exists today in a greater impact than it did in Dr. King's day. Now, Dr. King was so adamant about segregation that when he was sitting in a Birmingham jail, and we've all read that letter from the Birmingham jail, what we haven't read is the fact that 18 times he mentioned segregation. And he even described what a segregationist is. It's anyone who maintains the status quo, which is segregation.
Okay, so let me ask you this, because I remember growing up in the 70s. I grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland where I was the minority in that community. And I remember, the talk of segregation, and I remember all of the policy initiatives that were going to end segregation. And we've been, and you can disagree. I don't actually know, but we've been moving towards trying policies to end segregation for years. Why hasn't it happened? And what do we need to be doing to make that happen?
I'm glad you asked that question, because the answer is we have not been actually moving toward ending segregation. The challenges we have is that we talk in theory. Segregation is not theory. You can measure segregation. I'll give you an example. There are 2.6 million black-owned businesses in this country. Entrepreneurs and Hispanic entrepreneurs are one of the fastest rate of entrepreneurial growth we have in this country, which, by the way, we are in the midst of a long-term entrepreneurial decline because whites are declining. But among minorities, entrepreneurship has flourished. The problem is that out of that 2.6 million black-owned businesses, they only produce less than 1% GDP. Less than 1% GDP.
And why is that?
That's been that way since slavery.
No, I'm not going to argue. I'm not arguing the numbers. What I'm asking is why, if through all those businesses, do you not have more growth? Is there a reason for it?
Yes, the reason is that out of those 2.6 million, 2.5 million are sole proprietors with no employees. The reason is because as we have cultivated our talent, our entrepreneurial talent, we've cultivated them in segregated communities. So most of our black talent is coming out of what? We're coming out of poor communities with poor schools, poorly funded schools. Why are the schools poorly funded? Because we do not value the most vulnerable people among us. We do not provide the investment in those schools to make sure that those are the highest quality schools, or at least as equal to the highest quality schools elsewhere. That is by design. That's why we have HBCUs. You ask most white people, what is an HBCU? They have no idea.
Historically black college and university. Sure.
Exactly. It is fundamental to our history and to why we have created a segregated society, and the fact that black people at one time flourished under segregation because they had no other choice but to turn inward to themselves. And so we had multiple Black Wall Street.
Right. In fact, to highlight that, we had done a civil rights tour with the program back in 2015, and we were in Jackson, Mississippi. I was talking to the guy who's the head of the NAACP there, Frank Figures, and he had taken us down a street that was considered Black Wall Street there in Jackson, where he talked of a growing middle class and how the Masonic Temple was where they had they had a bank and insurance companies. They had their entire own economy that eventually was crushed because of desegregation.
Not because of desegregation, but because of urban renewal. Now, if you go back and you look at what urban renewal in the 50s and 60s was the raising of black communities across the country to put infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, highways and freeways and things of that nature. And they put them right in the middle, smack dab in the middle of black communities. It happened in Durham, it happened in Harlem, it happened in Detroit, it happened in Tulsa, on and on and on. You can look at all across the country and you will see that uniformly black communities were destroyed by what we called, what the government called urban renewal policy. Today, we have a modernized urban renewal, but it's gentrification. And what's happening is the same outcome. That's why when you ask me what's worse, I ask you, it depends on the outcome. The outcome was the rapid displacement of black people, as well as when you displace these people, you create problems in transportation, you create problems in education, you create problems in the ability for them to find jobs, you create problems in the ability for them to grow and sustain businesses, you create problems across the ecosystem of equitable access to opportunities and creating a quality lifestyle. So displacement is a problem, and it's systemic across the country. And in the last 50 years, we've actually designed this through what we call SEDS planning. Most people don't even know about SEDS planning, Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy Planning. This is looking 5 years out and determining what the economic environment is going to be for MSAs, Metropolitan Statistical Areas. And this is ubiquitous across the country. It's systemic. Every region of the country has a SEDS plan. No matter where you are, right, you have a SEDS plan. And black and brown communities are not included in the investment and outcomes of those SEDS plans. So 5 years out, they know that the economic environment is going to look different. They just know that it's going to look different for white folks. It's going to look the same for black folks. That's why black folks can look around and see things are changing around here. But for my community, they stay the same until the encroachment comes. And then when the encroachment comes, the land values rise, and black folks cannot afford the tax increases on their land, and the land increase causes the displacement. This is the gentrification, market-driven gentrification trends that cities and regions around the country are experiencing, and they know that this is not only disparate and not only discriminatory, but it's actually by design. And 61 cities have band together now, and they have started to, on behalf of black and brown communities, they've started to fight back. And many of them are now suing the banks, the lenders, J.P. Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, some of your biggest lenders out there.
Yeah. So let me ask you, because I've always seen that as, you know, just an attack on poverty in general. I mean, look, I talk about myself quite often. I grew up in a housing project. I was by far the minority in that community, and to me, it was more about green. We were all broke. It didn't matter the color of our skin. We didn't have any money. We weren't on the bus line. We were tucked over by the airport on crummy land. So gentrification, I think, and help me if I'm wrong, affects people of poverty just as much as they do people of color.
Well, keep in mind that we're talking degrees, right? If you started from nothing, your parents started from nothing, they were able to leave you nothing, because we always, when we think about black folks, and Trump will say, well, it's the lowest unemployment. Unemployment for black folks always follows unemployment for white folks, but it always remains at or near twice the rate. So white folks would never tolerate the unemployment rate that black folks have to endure. So when you talk about black folks and you look at how you measure how we live, and you talk about unemployment, don't talk about unemployment, talk about net worth, talk about wealth creation, talk about generational wealth, talk about business ownership and productivity, talk about job creation. When you start talking about these things, talk about home ownership, asset ownership. When you talk about these things and you start to measure these things, you start to see the extreme poverty that black folks have had, and all of the different barriers that have prevented them from coming out of that poverty, despite the fact that, no, we're not lazy.
No. So what do you then say to, and don't take this the wrong way, but what do you say to the person who says, look, you got these immigrants who have come here from other countries, and they started with nothing, but somehow that their businesses have excelled, and they're building the wealth that you're talking about, and they're doing those things. How do you make the argument one against the other?
Well, let me go back to Dr. King. When Dr. King in 1963, before he went to D.C., he went to Detroit. And he stood in front of Detroit, and he said, segregation is immoral, it's wrong, it's sinful, it's evil. It's a cancer in the body politic. And he said, in a real sense, we are through with segregation. Now, henceforth, and forevermore, and 25,000 folks stood on their feet. That's 1963.
Right.
In 1967, well, let's go to 1965, he's trying to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and Congressman John Edwards is getting his head beaten.
John Lewis, right.
John Lewis. And so you go to Birmingham, and then white folks are getting shot up because they're there in support of black folks. That's 1965. Later in that same year, you have the Voting Rights Act. Why do you need a Voting Rights Act when you already have the 15th Amendment giving us rights to vote? That same year, you have the Watts Riot. In 1967, you have Jim Brown bringing all the activist athletes together around Muhammad Ali in Cleveland and calling it the Ali Summit. Most folks don't even know that we've had 50 years of activist athletes and entertainers protesting the mistreatment and oppression of black folks for 50 years at the highest level of our voices, and we still can't be heard. Now, that's 1967, and in that same year, you had 150-plus cities in race riots. 150-plus cities. That's crazy. We're talking military in the streets, okay? Now, in Detroit, 67,000 whites fled that city in that exact same year. The next year, 1968, Bobby Kennedy was killed, King was killed, and 80,000 whites fled Detroit. But guess who came to Detroit in 1968 after King died? George Wallace. George Wallace came there, stood in the exact same arena, Cobo Hall, that King had stood in 5 years later, and he said, segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. But the last 50 years, our economy has changed. It went from an agricultural economy in the 19th century to a manufacturing economy in the 20th century. And in the 21st century, what we've done in the latter half of the 20th century to the 21st century, we changed our manufacturing economy into a knowledge-based, tech-driven, globally competitive innovation economy. Innovation. That's dependent upon entrepreneurship. And who are the folks that we believe are the most entrepreneurial? Immigrants. So we actually created policy. We created investment. We created strategies and plans for immigrants to come here, and we invested in them while we ignored black folks who was as entrepreneurial as anyone right in our own backyard.
All right, so let me ask, because I only got a couple more minutes, and I want to get to solutions. Because look, I think most white people, and I'll throw myself into the middle of this, want to be on the right side of history. Don't want to be oppressive. Don't believe that we're the problem. Want to help be the solution. So how do you move this forward? I mean, it's one thing to say that this is the situation. How do you move it forward? How do you make it right? Because look, I grew up in Cleveland, and I still go back to my hometown occasionally. Cleveland is an extremely segregated city. It's not just black and white. It's every shade of even white are still segregated because I don't know what it is. I think we like being in our own little tribes, if you will. So how do you get to a desegregated environment? How do you get to where you want to go?
Well, this is what we have to understand. We all have to recognize that this is a war. In your own words, you believe that most white people are good. They believe that they want to have work towards solutions and so on and so forth. That is not true.
I don't believe, but I don't believe black people are bad or brown people are bad. I want to believe the best of everybody.
I understand that, but what I'm trying to get your audience and you to recognize that this is the war did not die with Dr. King's death. This is a war, and the strategies of the war are segregationist policies and practices. So the way to end that war is first we have to recognize that it is a war, and we have to get on a stage and we have to say it. We have to call it out. The mayor of Detroit did that. Mike Duggan. He did that last year, and he shocked everybody when he showed what the history of Detroit was. And he said, now we're going to change that. And he began to talk about inclusive growth strategies that they were going to develop, and they were going to invest in the most vulnerable of their society, and they were going to cultivate the entrepreneurship talent that exists in the most vulnerable of their society, because he believed, and it is true, that if you invest in the talent that is inherent in the most vulnerable of your society, everyone else is going to benefit from that. And so there are policies and practices, both public and private sector, and the private sector is really a problem because they tend not to want to engage in these types of long-term structural investments, but we built our entire economy on a bedrock foundation of segregation, and we have to disrupt it, we have to dismantle it, and we have to discard it in order for us to build new frameworks that are inclusive and competitive for everyone, with equitable access to opportunity and prosperity for everyone. And that's one of the reasons why I'm headed to St. Paul, Minnesota. They're dealing with segregation like everybody else. It's systemic. And more than 100 foundations and public and private partners are coming to St. Paul next week, August 28th to 29th. And the Council on Foundations is producing an inclusive economic prosperity in the Midwest Summit to talk about these exact same issues and start to figure out what kind of new strategies can we develop, new infrastructure can we invest in over the long term, 10, 20 years, to redesign a new inclusive economy and an inclusive America. So these, as you said, there are good people out there that want these things to happen, but we cannot ignore the realities of what we have, because right now we're living Wallace's dream versus King, and we need to flip that.
Mike, I appreciate the thoughts, the time. I would love to hear more about this. So as you continue your work, I'd love to hear more of what you're doing, and I would like to get you back at some point in the future to talk about it further.
Rick, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Good stuff. Thanks so much, Mike Green. Again, you want to check out their website. We'll get a link out. I think it's Scale Up Just look up Scale Up Partners, LLC. That'll help you find some of that. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around.
All of my life I've searched for clarity. I have wrestled with two paths buried deep inside of me. I lost some rounds, been knocked around, felt my share of defeat. Yet somehow I've always managed to get back on my feet.
Hurricane Lane is a very serious storm.
Hawaii braces for rare impact from powerful hurricanes.
I'm getting rid of some of these ridiculous rules and regulations which are killing our companies, our states, and our jobs.
EPA admits Trump's replacement for the Clean Power Plan will kill thousands of Americans. Plus,
the ruling by the D.C. Circuit Court counters efforts under the Trump administration to delay environmental regulations first introduced by former President Barack Obama.
Some good news. The Trump administration keeps losing environmental court cases.
All of that good news and bad straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
We're canceling Obama's illegal anti-coal destroying regulations.
Oh, shut up. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, I hope our friends listening in Hawaii have battened down the hatches. It looks like this storm could be pretty bad.
Yes, Hawaii Governor David Ige has issued an emergency proclamation closing schools and mobilizing resources in preparation for significant impacts from powerful Hurricane Lane, which could potentially make a rare direct hit on the island chain. Hurricane Lane has already entered the record books. Lane reached Category 5 on Tuesday, becoming only the second Category 5 hurricane in recorded history to pass within 350 miles of the state. That's according to the National Weather Service.
So this is very rare that Hawaii gets hit by hurricanes at all, correct?
That is correct.
And so I know there are actually not enough storm shelters in Hawaii, so we're just hoping everyone can stay safe over the next few days.
Meanwhile, we now have more information on the Trump Environmental Protection Agency's proposal to replace the Clean Power Plan, President Obama's first ever carbon emission standards for U.S. power plants. The Trump scheme is another attempt to bail out the polluting coal industry. So, of course, they're going to call it the Affordable Clean Energy Rule. But Conrad Schneider, advocacy director of the nonprofit group Clean Air Task Force, tells the Green News Report that the Trump EPA's own data outright states that the Trump plan will actually harm more Americans by increasing air pollution.
They admit that the change from the Obama plan to their proposal would result in 1,400 unnecessary premature deaths per year by 2030. So that's thousands and thousands of Americans who would die prematurely under the Trump plan, whose lives would have been saved under the Obama plan.
Just to be clear, the EPA's mandate is to protect public health. But wait, there's more. Remember how the Trump administration recently proposed weakening vehicle mileage and emissions standards?
I do.
Internal emails show the administration had been warned by its own transportation experts that the rollback would actually increase annual highway deaths. Top officials knew that and proposed it anyway.
So they know their new plan for coal plants is going to kill people. They know their new scheme to decrease mileage efficiency standards will kill people. And yet the Trump administration proposes this anyway?
Yes, they do.
Who exactly do they think the Environmental Protection Agency is supposed to protect?
But there is some good news. In just the last few weeks, the federal courts have delivered scathing rebukes to the Trump administration's efforts to roll back environmental protections. We already told you about the federal appeals court ordering the Trump administration to ban all uses of the toxic pesticide chlorpyrifos within 60 days. Then a federal judge in Montana dealt yet another setback to the controversial Keystone XL pipeline from Canada. The judge ordered the Trump State Department to do a new, full environmental impact study on the pipeline's revised route, which will further delay construction. Then a district court in South Carolina overturned the administration's attempt to delay the Obama-era Waters of the United States rule for failing to follow public comment procedures, also known as the Clean Water Rule. It is now in effect, protecting the drinking water in 26 states. Then the D.C. Court of Appeals ordered the administration to immediately implement Obama's chemical safety rule for chemical facilities that were put in place after the deadly 2013 West Texas fertilizer explosion. The court said the Trump EPA delay, quote, makes a mockery of the statute. And then the D.C. court also rejected the EPA's bid to stall rules governing toxic coal ash waste ponds, agreeing with environmental groups that the Obama-era regulations on coal ash waste do not go far enough to protect drinking water. It's kind of weird that losses for the EPA are now considered a win for the environment and public health, but here we are.
Here we are, and it's a reminder how the constitutional Article 3 courts right now are saving us, and why it's so important that folks pay attention to what may be about to happen on the U.S. Supreme Court, who could overturn all of those rulings if Brett Kavanaugh is seated on the court. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
So this has got to be the most expensive 5-minute phone call in history. Turns out, you remember Scott Pruitt? Remember the disgraced EPA head who was ousted for tons of scandal and all kinds of misuse of money and lobbyist deals and just all kinds of insanity. Remember him? I know it's been a while, but with all of the minutia going on around Trump, evidently the Superman phone booth. Or I've heard people call it the Get Smartphone booth, whatever. Evidently, the super secret phone booth, which cost thousands of dollars, they are now saying one phone call was made from that secret, super secret, soundproof skiff phone booth, and it was made on January 29th. Lasted all of 5 minutes, and for that, $43,000. For one 5-minute phone call. Now they're saying don't know how many calls came in, and they're assuming none. So one phone call. Now, according to Pruitt when he testified before the House Energy and Commerce Committee last April, the phone booth was intended for confidential communications. And even he said that it's rare that we have these confidential communications. So once, 43 grand. Now, the interesting part about it is the Government Accountability Office has already concluded that wasting the money on this violated federal spending laws. But hey, 43 grand spent already. Probably could have used that a little bit better. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the EPA and, well, the recent attack on really just everything of the Obama administration, especially when it had to do with the environment, our good friend Isaiah Poole. Isaiah is the editorial manager for the Democracy Collaborative. Isaiah, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, my pleasure.
So 43 grand for a phone call, Isaiah.
And it wasn't even to me.
How do you know?
Well, you know, it's like, yeah, but this is the thing. Well, Scott Pruitt, of course, is finally gone. His legacy, unfortunately, continues in the sense that the really bad stuff that he was doing, the stuff that really didn't make the big headlines, is continuing.
Yep.
And one of those things is the overturning, the proposed overturning of the Obama era Clean Power Plan. And their substitute, which is called the Affordable Green Energy Plan, is actually, according to the EPA's own numbers, will shorten the lives of up to 1,400 people every year over the next 12 years.
Wow. Well, you know, hey, this is how we thin the herd. If you can't take the coal dust, get out of the country.
Well, yeah, I mean that's what it is. I mean, it is remarkable that when stories sort of fleshed that out, news stories fleshed that out, there's been, as far as I know, no response from the EPA or the Trump White House about that. I mean, you just have to take it that they're very unapologetic about that. In order to save the coal industry, and to save the coal barons who have not given a damn about the environment or the workers in the coal mines or people who need to breathe clean air. The idea that 1,400 people every year are going to have their lives shortened is just the cost of doing business. And by the way, I'm wheezing a little bit because I actually have a cold, and that sort of underscores, I'm the kind of person that's in danger because of this stuff.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, you were kind of a little flemming up there. I was wondering if maybe it's already starting.
Well, on top of the silliness that the administration did a few weeks ago, in which they said that we need to roll back auto fuel efficiency standards because if cars get more efficient, we will drive them more, and then we're going to get into more accidents. I mean, it's incredibly...
Yeah, I read that. That was great. And look, there are people who believe this. And when I first saw it, I just said, this has got to be like an Onion report. This has got to be one of those things that nobody really believes it. But there it was, right in black and white. We need lower cafe standards so people spend more money on gas, so they drive less, and they get into less accidents. That is one of the most bizarre rationales I've ever heard.
And we need bigger cars.
Well, as a bigger guy, I'm not really opposed to bigger cars. I mean, I look at some of these things. There's a car, a little pink car. It looks like a Tic Tac. I'm going. I don't know how you get into that thing. And I guess if you were in an accident,
that's why Aretha Franklin, the great Aretha Franklin, gave us the pink Cadillac for people like you.
There you go. But I look at it and I go, the good thing is if I was ever in an accident, it would double as a coffin. You could just bury me in it.
Yeah, well, there you go. But, what's remarkable is that this is the kind of thing that would be front page news if it were not for the fact that we are, we have all of the stuff of Michael Cohen, and today it's David Pecker, and what's in the National Enquirer safe, and
and you got to worry about Weaselberg.
What did you say?
Don't forget about Weaselberg.
Oh, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Is it Weaselberg or Weisselberg?
Weisselberg.
See, I thought it was Weaselberg, and I was going, that's a pretty great name.
Yes. The controller, the financial person of the Trump organization, who, if there were dollars from illicit sources slushing around the Trump organization, he knows how much there are and what they were for and where they came from.
Yep, give him a shovel. Start digging up the bodies. I want to know.
Exactly.
Inquiring minds want to know.
Exactly right.
Is it? I don't really want to get off the EPA too much, but isn't it amazing that a supermarket tabloid could be what brings down the White House? That actual fake news.
Exactly. And this idea of paying money to the National Enquirer to kill stories about the affairs that you're having, which end up coming out anyway. So this was, the incredible thing about this is that this was money that was, everybody knows the Stormy Daniels story. Everybody knows the story of the other woman that the National Enquirer tried to
McDougal.
Yes, McDougal tried to kill.
Isn't it amazing that anytime you're talking about sex and the president, there's money involved?
Well, except that when Bill Clinton had the Lewinsky thing, I mean, there wasn't money. There was just the, what a lot of men unfortunately do. They have a little hanky panky and then they lie about it to keep it from their spouse, and that was what passed for a scandal.
Yeah, but I look at Trump and I'm like, why would he bother? I mean, why would you bother? Everyone knows that you're a cad. Everyone knows that's. Why would you bother paying either one of them off? It really makes no sense to me unless there's something more there.
Well, I mean, other than the fact that I read an article, I believe it was the New York Times, that made this observation that this is sort of how the mob and the mafia sort of operates in the circles where Trump has been walking for the last 30 years. So in that sense, if you want to squelch a story, you use money to squelch the story.
Yeah.
It's just sort of, and people have observed how, that phone call that leaked, in which Trump and is discussing the payment to David Pecker and the Enquirer and how it's going to be set up, how casual that conversation was, how matter-of-fact that conversation was.
Yeah, like he's done it a million times.
Exactly.
Because he probably has. I mean, look, any surprise in this? I mean, paying off a mistress here and there, that's all in a day's work. What I really want to know, are we going to get the Pecker papers? Do we get to see them?
Well, that is an excellent question. The fact that he's a cooperating witness is really tantalizing.
Yeah, I mean, think about this for a second. A supermarket tabloid has compromat on this president. Imagine what the Russians have.
Imagine what the Russians have. Exactly right. And, we haven't really gotten to, the fact that Donald Trump has a witch's broom under his bed, that there's a cauldron in the kitchen, and there's a whole case of Aya's nudes. And, that we, it's like, if you want to talk about witch hunt, I mean, you've got all of the components of witchery right there in his campaign and in the White House. And he's surrounded by now we know of basically admitted witches and warlocks.
Yeah, but come on, be nice to Sarah Sanders and the other one. I can. Oh, come on, the skeleton woman, the blonde,
you're
the
talking
blonde
about
Kellyanne Conway. The blonde skeleton, yeah.
Yeah,
her.
I was actually thinking of the male witches that have already been indicted or have already pleaded guilty for various crimes.
And you look at this and you go, at some point, all of this has to culminate in some kind of a final moment, because now you've got Cohen, who knows where the bodies are. You've got Weaselberg, who knows where the bodies are. It's not looking good, and not just from the Mueller point of view. I mean, all of this stuff looks like it's on the state level.
Well, yeah, and the interesting thing, of course, as you know about the state level crimes, is that there's no way that Donald Trump can pardon his way out of those. He might be able to pardon a Paul Manafort, and I think there would be all sorts of hell would break loose if there was a pardon of a convicted tax evader of the likes of Paul Manafort. But the state level, the stuff that they have by virtue of the fact that the Trump organization operates out of New York City, that's stuff that you cannot pardon your way out of.
Nope.
And it's quite possible that the president will get an indictment or some sort of legal action against him directly, or certainly the organization would. Highly likely that his sons will within the next few weeks. And
that's the hope. It's what I've been saying. Look, it's now open. It's now open season. And the hope is that's where it goes. But I want to go back to, I didn't want to get sidetracked off into the Trump rabbit hole. The hope is we find out more about which federal prisons they'll be in, or which state prison they're in, whichever. I'm just hoping for a nice long stay at a Gray Bar Hotel, either on the state or federal level. But I want to get back to the EPA thing. How likely is this that you're going to end up destroying the Clean Power Plan and in taking us down the coal hole? Because look, there's some people who are saying, look, we need coal because we're making better strides in clean burning technology. We're gonna actually get to the point where we're gonna have clean coal.
Well, there are a couple of interesting things that are going on here. Well, first of all, keep in mind that the proposal is a proposal. It's going to go through a 90-day comment period. So we have 90 days, actually now about 86 or so days to fight this. And so, get your pen, go to the EPA website, say that you don't like this. It may not. I would say do that, even if you think that doesn't make a difference. I think they need to hear that the American public doesn't stand for this. Number one. Number two, the segment that you had just earlier showed how the courts have actually delivered some significant victories to the environmental movement against the Trump administration. So there will be lawsuits, and it's highly likely that a lot of these lawsuits will not go the administration's way. Finally, the plan that the Trump administration put out there is making less and less economic sense by the day, precisely because the cost of clean energy is coming down,
right,
vis-a-vis coal.
I mean, but isn't that the end? I mean, isn't that really the point of the whole clean energy plan? Was that the reality that these green energies are going to come online and they're going to get much cheaper, and all of the costs of digging up and destroying the environment and all of the external costs that coal brings along, it's just going to make it an outdated, expensive form of energy, and maybe we use it for something else.
And maybe we use it for something else.
No, look, I met a guy from West Virginia University. He claims that you can use coal for a whole bunch of things outside of burning, and he said it's his belief that in 50 years they're going to look back and go, "You used to burn this stuff? How stupid are you?" because it can be used for other purposes other than just burning and having the emissions go into the air.
I get your point. I think that is that's certainly the thing that we should be moving to. That would actually be if there was a commercially beneficial use of coal other than polluting the environment with it. That would be a wonderful thing, because then you could. That is one additional thing that you could say to workers in the coal industry. Look, instead of mining this stuff to burn it in power plants, we could use it to do whatever thing that is a much more beneficial use. But I think actually the thing that we've been talking about inside the Democracy Collaborative is how do we over time just shut down the fossil fuel industry, shut down coal, shut down big oil, and we are going. A couple of our folks will be going to the Global Climate Action Summit in San Francisco next month, and we are going to be encouraging dialogue around this idea of how you do basically a controlled shutdown of the fossil fuel industry, using the power of the federal government, using the power of the Federal Reserve, because the Federal Reserve can do what they did 10 years ago to stop the implosion of the financial sector 10 years ago. And they did a process called quantitative easing.
Right. Do you ever really honestly see the end of the use of fossil fuels? I mean, oil, gas, coal. Do you really see an end to that?
Well, I mean, I think we won't see it unless and we won't see it if we don't begin to envision what that could be. This is about pushing the envelope of policy beyond, and like let's stop thinking that a fossil fuel free world is not possible, because actually we can make it possible, and then let's have the conversation about how.
Interesting.
Because the reality is that every study that I've seen says that at the rate we're going, we are not going to make that 2 degrees centigrade limit on global warming. 2 degrees centigrade of additional warming has been said by scientists as the tipping point beyond which we begin to get catastrophic effects. And we're not going to make that target without doing something very, very drastic.
Yeah, and which is why I don't think we're ever going to make it.
Well, if we don't make it, then what's happening in Hawaii right now with a 5-mile-an-hour hurricane that's dumping 30 or 40 inches of rain is going to be a new normal for a lot of the world. That sort of thing is going to become a regular occurrence when we start destabilizing the planet's climate because of the fossil fuel, the carbon we're putting into the atmosphere.
So let me ask you a last question then. How do we push this agenda forward? How do you move forward on this? Because that's an incredibly large task, especially here in Pennsylvania, where they're building a pipeline right now to make sure that for the next 50 to 100 years, we're pumping shale gas out, and underneath that, actual oil out. How do you do that?
Well, I mean, I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I think you start the conversation. I think you start the conversation first with the realization that this is a crisis. This is the sort of, this is in many ways, it's like the previous generation's Pearl Harbor. And if you think about what the country was able to do in response to Pearl Harbor and the sacrifices that the country was able to make to win World War II, to save the country and really to save the planet, we're kind of approaching that moment. And I think the more we realize that that is the space that we are in, I think the more possible it becomes to begin to talk about really audacious ideas, really talk about pushing the envelope and doing things that we know are possible, because a world based on solar, a world based on wind, a world based on other sorts of green technologies, this is not pie in the sky stuff. This is stuff that's happening today. It's technology that we've got in our hands right now, and the only thing that's keeping us from deploying these technologies is the power of big money in the fossil fuel industry.
And the power of us going to the ballot box. I hope people will pay attention and check it out. Hope they check out your website, democracycollaborative.org is the site. We'll make sure we get links out so people can take a look at that.
And also our other project was the Next System Project.
The Next System Project. We'll make sure we get stuff out there. And I'm sure you're going to come back and you're going to tell us all about that as you go to San Francisco and as that continues, and help keep us up to date.
Absolutely.
Good stuff. Isaiah, I appreciate the time, man.
Certainly.
As always, our good friend Isaiah Poole. He's the editorial manager over there at the Democracy Collaborative, democracycollaborative.org, the website. Quick break, right back after this to wrap things up. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
We're the ones to die, the first ones in line for that pie in the sky, and we're always the last when the craving shade out for the worker is working when the fat counts above. We're the first ones to stop, we're the first ones to die.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
To this battle, take my Union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery, for this war is one you're bound to lose. You fascists are bound to lose.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So, what a week it has been. Let the craziness continue into the golf weekend. And in fact, I found it interesting. Trump gave his little spiel at the Republican dinner in Ohio. And it's just one of these things. It's kind of childish. And, I guess it's what I expect from Trump. But evidently, he criticized the Democratic Party, saying that he refuses to say Democratic Party, but would instead say Democrat Party. He says, quote, "I always hated the Democrat Party. Doesn't sound good. That's why I say it." And again, this is one of those, those petulant little child things that the Republicans have done. And I know some on the left, want to use some kind of, pejorative term for Republican. And I've seen Rethuglican, and it just seems very childish to me. It just does. But it's amazing how well the Republicans all got onto the same Democrat, emphasizing the rat. Like that's an insult. Oh, what a scary week. And I'll tell you, it's only going to get worse from here. So take some time, rest up, have a good weekend. Maybe do some, going to be one of the last weekends before Labor Day. Enjoy some time away. And of course, if you missed any of the program, download the podcast, thericksmithshow.com. Get the app on the smartphone. Take the program wherever you go. As always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much. See you back here Monday.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's color like time, flood beneath the lunar sway.